I took the night job in the hospital basement because I thought nothing really happened down there after dark. Upstairs they had codes, chaos, people crashing and coming back. Down below, past the elevators that smelled like disinfectant and old metal, it was supposed to be quieter. Just storage rooms, the morgue, the old laundry tunnel no one used anymore, and a security office with flickering monitors. The posting called it Night Operations Assistant. What it actually meant was one underpaid body to sit in the basement between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., make sure no one broke into the pharmacy cage, answer the internal phone, and call for help if a pipe burst or a drunk wandered in through the loading dock. The first time I walked down there alone, I understood why the job never stayed filled. The lights hummed like they were struggling. Long hallways stretched in 3 directions, painted that sickly off-white every hospital seems to use, with green lines on the floor pointing toward different departments: imaging, pathology, supply, morgue. The air felt cooler than upstairs, but thicker somehow, like it had collected every breath from every patient above and kept them. I met with the night supervisor, an old nurse named Rosa with deep lines around her mouth and a badge that said she'd been there almost 3 decades. She walked me through my duties in 15 minutes, like she'd done it 50 times before. "This is your office." She tapped the glass of the tiny control room by the freight elevator. "You sit here, you watch the screens. If someone calls from a basement extension, you answer." I looked at the monitors behind the desk. 12 feeds: loading dock, freight elevator, morgue hallway, pharmacy door, supply corridor, and a few black and white views of long, empty stretches of tile. "What about that one?" I pointed at a feed in the bottom corner. It showed a narrow hallway with low ceilings and pipes running overhead, lit by a single flickering strip of light. No sign, no lines on the floor, just concrete. She didn't look at the monitor. "That's for maintenance," she said. "Old service corridor. You don't need to go there." "What's down there?" I asked. She paused just long enough for me to notice. "Nothing you're responsible for," she said. "If anything's wrong, they'll call. And if they don't call, you don't go." She handed me a ring of keys, heavy, labeled with tiny stickers, and a laminated card with extension numbers. "If you hear a rapid tone, that's a code overhead," she said. "You're not clinical, so you stay put. If anyone comes down here looking lost, you send them upstairs. And if you hear announcements for a ward that doesn't exist, you ignore it and call switchboard." I blinked. "A ward that doesn't exist?" She shrugged like she wished she hadn't said it. "Old floor, old naming system. Sometimes the speakers forget we moved on. It's just a glitch, mijo. Don't let it get inside your head. Night shift already does enough of that." Then she patted my arm, told me where the coffee machine was, and took the elevator back up to actual life. I was alone. The first 2 nights were boring in the way that makes you start hearing things. The building groaned and clicked. Water rushed somewhere behind the walls. Carts rattled overhead, distant enough to sound like muffled thunder. The morgue door stayed shut. The loading dock camera showed only darkness and the occasional stray cat. I read, scrolled, drank bad coffee, and tried not to stare too long at the old service corridor camera. I told myself the flicker in the light was just old wiring. The black stretch of shadow at the end of the hallway was just distance, not depth. The 3rd night, the hospital started talking to me. It was around 2:30 a.m. I remember because I'd just signed off a supply delivery for the lab and was initialing a log sheet when the overhead speakers crackled. Code announcements are usually crisp and impersonal. Code blue, ICU, rapid response, room 314. The voice they use is always the same calm, professional female recording. This one was not that voice. It came over the speakers in the basement only, tinny and low, like it was traveling from far away through old wires. Code Blue, it said. Sublevel Ward C, Bed 12. I froze, pen hovering over the paper. We didn't have a sublevel Ward C. The basement had storage rooms, imaging, pathology, and the morgue. That was it. I'd memorized the map. I picked up the internal phone and hit the button for the switchboard. Switch, a bored voice answered. Hey, it's, night ops in the basement, I said. We just got a code blue overhead for sublevel Ward C, Bed 12. Is that real? There was a pause, the kind where you can hear someone turning to look at someone else. We didn't send that, the operator said. There's no Ward C in the building anymore. They changed nomenclature years ago. Then why did it go overhead? I asked. Probably the old system burped, she said. I'll let engineering know. If you hear it again, write down the time for them. She hung up, already moving on. I wrote down the time. 10 minutes later, the camera for the old service corridor pinged. A little red box appeared on the monitor. Motion detected. Service level hall. I clicked the feed. The screen showed the same narrow corridor, same pipes on the ceiling, same half-dead fluorescent bar. At the very edge of the frame, just before the hallway vanished into shadow, something moved. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but the shape pulled forward, resolving into the outline of a hospital bed. It rolled slowly into view, a standard metal frame on wheels with a thin mattress. No sheets, no blanket, just a bare mattress and an IV pole attached to the side. No one was pushing it. It stopped in the dead center of the hallway and sat there, perfectly still. A single dark mark stained the middle of the mattress, round and dried. I stared at the screen, waiting for someone to walk into frame, reach for the bed, move it along. Nothing. The motion alert timer ticked down and cleared. The little red box disappeared like nothing unusual had happened. I watched that feed until my eyes watered. The bed did not move. At 3:02 a.m., a chime sounded on the internal phone. One short ring, the kind you get when someone dials an extension and then hangs up. I picked up the receiver anyway. Night operations, I said. There was no voice on the other end, just a soft, rhythmic sound. It took me a second to place it. Beeping. A heart monitor. Steady and slow. Hello? I said. Who is this? The beeping continued, unbothered. It wasn't loud. It sounded like it was coming through a wall. Then, under the beeping, I heard a wet, rattling breath. Is this ICU? I asked, already knowing it wasn't. Is someone? The line clicked and went dead. I put the phone down very carefully. I told myself it was crosstalk in the system. That happens in old buildings, right? Wires cross, signals leak, alarms bounce down the wrong hallway. I held on to that explanation like a lifeline until 3:15 a.m., when the overhead speakers crackled again. Code Blue, the same low voice said. Sublevel Ward C, Bed 12. This time, it whispered the last two words, like it had moved closer to the microphone. I checked the cameras. The bed in the service corridor had moved. It was 3 feet closer to the camera, angled slightly now, like someone had started to turn it around. The dark stain on the mattress seemed larger. I didn't call switchboard. I didn't call anyone. I sat in my chair, staring at the screen, and waited for my shift to end. In the morning, when the day staff drifted in like a tide, I mentioned the phantom code to Rosa as casually as I could. She was stirring powdered creamer into a coffee she clearly didn't want. Sometimes the old system plays back recordings, she said, from before the hospital renovation, when there actually was a Ward C on sublevel. It was down here, years ago, before it flooded. Flooded? I asked. She nodded, eyes still on her cup. Pipe burst in the ceiling, she said, back when I was still on nights. No one died in the flood itself. They moved the patients upstairs, but the equipment The monitors. They lost power in the middle of the night. Lots of codes in a short time. Families sued. Administration pretends it never happened. Was there a bed 12? I asked, surprising myself with the specificity of the question. She finally looked at me. There were 40 beds, she said slowly. I don't remember the numbers. I remember the sound. The sound? She tapped her chest, just once, of something realizing you can't get it back. She said, before you do. Then she walked away. I told myself again that it was all just leftover noise. Old wiring and older grief trapped in speakers and cables. The building's version of a stutter. The next night, I took a thermos of coffee strong enough to peel paint and resolved to pay more attention to the monitors. At 1:47 a.m., the motion alert pinged for the service corridor. The bed was gone. The camera feed showed the empty hallway, pipes sweating on the ceiling, flickering light casting tired shadows. The floor looked cleaner where the bed had been, like the grime had been recently disturbed. Every other camera was still. I got up, walked to the door of the control room, then stopped with my hand on the knob. The rules were simple. Don't leave your post unless there's a leak or a fire. Call maintenance for everything else. Don't go where you're not sent. But there's something about watching a bed move by itself on a grainy monitor that makes rules feel like suggestions. I grabbed my badge and flashlight. I told myself I was just going to walk the main basement hall, check that no one had actually come down. That's what a responsible employee would do. It wasn't like I was going to go looking for some ancient ward that didn't exist anymore. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stepped into the hallway. The floor was cold through my cheap shoes. The morgue corridor to my left was dark. I didn't look down it. I followed the green line on the floor that pointed toward imaging, then cut across to the service stairs. Down here, the building felt different. The hum of life from the upper floors dimmed. The air smelled faintly of metal and something sweeter underneath, like flowers left too long in water. I found myself outside a door I'd never really noticed before, because it was always propped open with a rubber wedge, the entry to the old service corridor. Tonight, the wedge was gone. The door was shut. My ID badge shouldn't have worked on the reader, but when I tapped it, the lock clicked. The fluorescent bar flickered to life on the other side with a sound like someone inhaling sharply. The air in that corridor was colder still and damp, closer to basement below basement than just ground level. Pipes ran overhead in a dense knot, a sweating condensation. Rust bloomed around old joints. The concrete floor sloped slightly downward. I told myself I would take 10 steps and then turn back. On step 3, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The internal display said, "Unknown extension." I answered it because not answering felt worse. "Night operations," I whispered, voice shaking. The same heart monitor beep came through, slow and patient. Underneath it, a voice rasped, dry as dust. "Room 12, it said. You're late." I hung up without meaning to. My fingers just let go. The tone of the disconnected call echoed too long in the corridor, like the concrete was replaying it for itself. I should have turned around. Any sane person would have. But fear does strange things. Sometimes it makes you run. Sometimes it makes you want to see the thing that's scaring you. So at least it has a shape. The corridor bent slightly to the left, then opened into a wider space. It wasn't a ward, not really. Not anymore. Just a long room lined on both sides, with old bed brackets and scuff marks where equipment had once stood. The walls were a different shade of paint here, older and more yellowed. On the floor, faint numbers were still stenciled in front of where each bed had been. 8, 10, 12. The number had been half painted over at some point, but I could still read it. There was a bed there now. Not a modern one. This frame was older, chipped, with side rails that looked more like cage bars. The mattress was sagging in the middle, a dried, dark stain spread out from the center like something had spilled and never been properly cleaned. An IV pole stood beside it. It held no bag, just a long, brittle tube that trailed to the mattress and disappeared in the stain. The overhead lights in this room were off. The only illumination came from the sickly glow of the hallway behind me and a single monitor screen on the wall to my right. It was one of those old bedside monitors, the kind that shows heart rate, oxygen, blood pressure. The casing was yellowed. The screen was cracked in one corner. It was on. A green line pulsed across it, steady and slow. Beep, beep, beep. There were no wires connected to it. I stood in the doorway, throat dry, heart pounding so loud it felt like it was echoing. The air around the bed felt heavier, like walking into humidity, except it was still cold. "Hello?" I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "Is anyone down here?" The monitor beeped faster for 2 seconds, then settled again. The IV line twitched. I took a step back. Something crinkled under my shoe. I looked down. A plastic patient ID band lay on the floor, flipped face down, the kind they snap around your wrist when you're admitted. I knew because they'd made us put one on in orientation to show us how to scan it. I picked it up before I could stop myself. The inside was printed with a name and a date of birth. The ink was smeared, but I could make out enough. Last name, Marquez. Date of birth, 02/11/1984. Admission date, 07/3/1984. I frowned. That couldn't be right. No one was admitted as a newborn in 1984 and still had a fresh-looking band on the floor 40 years later. Someone could have dropped an old prop, maybe. Or this was some kind of sick joke. I turned the band over. On the outside, in smaller text, was a ward and bed assignment. Sublevel ward C, bed 12. My mouth went dry. The monitor beeped steadily behind me. I didn't notice the footsteps until they were too close to pretend I hadn't heard them. Soft, bare, just behind me, at the edge of the light from the hallway. I turned around slowly. No one stood there, but the floor was wet, as if someone had just stepped out of a shower and walked through, leaving no footprints, just a dim sheen that caught the light. The smell hit me then. Not rot. Hospitals are actually good at hiding that. It was more like old antiseptic and something faintly sour, like linens that had been closed up wet. My phone buzzed again. This time the display simply said, bed 12. I didn't answer. The beeping from the monitor grew louder, even though I hadn't moved closer to it. It climbed faster and faster until it became almost a drone. Then it flatlined, that horrible long tone every nurse knows too well. The overhead speakers in the basement crackled at the same time. "Code blue," the low voice said. "Sublevel ward C, bed 12. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the main corridor. 1 second I was in that room. The next I was fumbling with the control room door, slamming it shut behind me, my hands shaking so hard I had to try 3 times to get the lock to turn. On the monitors, every feed looked normal, except the service corridor. The bed was gone again. The camera showed only the empty hallway, pipes sweating calmly on the ceiling. The motion alert log showed nothing for the past hour. I sat there until my shift ended, fingers digging into the arms of the chair so hard my knuckles hurt. I didn't tell Rosa everything. I told her about the phantom code, again, and the beeping on the phone. She listened, eyes tired, like she'd already known this conversation would happen someday. "They flooded that level in July," she said quietly. 1984, night shift. Some of the patients were on experimental ventilators. They didn't move them in time. Did anyone, I struggled to say it, did anyone named Marquez die? She hesitated, then nodded. "A child," she said. I wasn't on that floor, but I saw the chart. They doubled up some of the kids down there because upstairs was full. Administration tried to call it an accident. The papers called it something else. Why is it still announcing codes? I asked. Why is there a bed down there at all? She looked up at the ceiling like she was listening to something only she could hear. Some things keep their own record, she said. The hospital doesn't want to remember. The family didn't get the closure they needed. But something in the wires, in the walls, thinks it's still the same night. I told her I'd gone down there, that there was a monitor still working, in a room that shouldn't exist, with a bed marked 12. Her face went pale. They sealed that corridor after the flood, she said, poured concrete over half the doors. The keycard readers down there haven't worked in years. But mine did, I said. Then don't use it again, she snapped, more fear than anger in her voice. And if the hospital calls a code for somewhere that isn't on the map, you let it ring out. Watching isn't always helping. I quit a week later, officially because the hours were messing with my sleep. Unofficially because every night after that, the system got bolder. The phone would ring at exactly 3:03 a.m., and if I answered, all I would hear was the silence between beeps, like a child holding their breath. The monitor on the wall in the control room, my monitor, the one showing all the cameras, would flash a message in the corner for a split second between inputs. Room 12. Not cleared. When a real code was called upstairs for an actual ward with actual nurses, the basement speakers would sometimes overlay their own quiet announcement underneath, just for me. Sublevel Ward C, the voice would murmur. Bed 12, still waiting. The last straw wasn't even that dramatic. I was walking home from a different job months later, in a different part of the city. I'd taken a gig stocking shelves at a 24-hour supermarket. Bright lights, canned music. Nothing haunted except maybe the prices. One night, as I cut through an alley on my way back to my apartment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with an internal-looking number, 4 digits, a dash, then 3 more, the kind hospitals use. I answered without thinking. A heart monitor beeped in my ear, slow and patient. Then a child's voice, not a whisper, not a moan, just a small, tired voice, said my name. Not the name on my badge, my real name, the one I hadn't worn on any ID since high school. I waited, it said. You came, then you left. I stopped walking. I can't help you, I said. I don't work there anymore. It still does, the voice said. It's still counting. The line went dead. I changed my number the next day. I moved apartments. I told myself it was just a very, very cruel prank. But sometimes, around 3 in the morning, when I'm lying awake and the building is too quiet, I hear it anyway. Not through a speaker, not through a phone, just faintly, like it's coming through the pipes in the wall, or the wiring in the ceiling, or something old and unfinished in the dark. A flatline tone that never quite ends. Then over it, a calm, distant voice. Code Blue, Sublevel Ward C, Bed 12. And part of me knows that somewhere, under the concrete of a hospital that doesn't even use that labeling anymore, a monitor that's not plugged into anything is still tracing a line that refuses to stop. You can call it a glitch. You can call it grief stuck in old plastic and copper. But if you ever work nights in a hospital basement and the speakers call a code for a ward no one can find on a map, do me a favor. Don't go looking for room 12. And if you answer a ringing phone and hear beeping with no wires attached, hang up. Some charts are never closed.